Hello, my friend. In the not too distant past, I made a video about my top 15 favorite expansions for board games, and I mentioned in that video that I was going to do a separate one for my top 10 standalone expansions. And, of course, as I'm sure you know, that's what this video is all about. The only thing I'll mention before we dive into the top 10 are I sort of shoehorned the first two games in here, although they're more of a re-implementation of a game than an actual standalone expansion, but I wanted to fill out the 10, so I squeezed these in here, and I'm going to have to ask for your lenience with these first two. Much like with my previous expansions video, where I ranked them according to the amount of effect they had on the game that they were expanding, I have ranked my list of standalone expansions in order from sort of the least change from the original game to the greatest amount of change to the game. So rather than, I guess, least favorite to most favorite, it's more by the impact that the standalone expansion has on the original game that is based on. So let's get right into it with number 10. And that is The Builder's Antiquity. This is a game that follows up on one called The Builder's Middle Ages, and it adds a couple of fun new elements to that game to create a new experience. I don't know for sure if you could take the new elements from this one and insert them into the original Middle Ages game, or whether that just straight up wouldn't work. But I do enjoy this as a simple card-based game of engine building and gaining points through building buildings. I haven't actually played The Builder's Middle Ages to know exactly how it compares, but I do quite enjoy the Antiquity version that I have here. Next up is a game that was a follow-up to a game called Paperback. This one is called Hardback. Both these games I would describe as Scrabble meets Dominion, in that they are word-building games using the deck-building mechanism. I used to own Paperback, and I sold it when Hardback came out, because while they're both good games, and they both are different in their own way, Hardback really ups the deck-building aspect of the game, as well as makes the word creation slightly easier with the way they use wildcards. So there are a couple of things that Hardback does that I really quite enjoy. Some people do prefer Paperback still, but I think I would lean towards Hardback overall. It's definitely a fun word-building game. Number 8, we have... Oh shoot, I just realized that number 8 isn't a standalone expansion either. This probably should have been in my previous list of expansions, because at number 8 I have Clank, a deck-building adventure, and I've got a bunch of expansions for Clank here. In fact, I think I own everything that's available for it, including the expansions Sunken Treasures and The Mummy's Curse, as well as a couple that they called Clank Expeditions, which were gold and silk, as well as Temple of the Ape Lords. Each of them adds a whole new map to play on, which is, I think, why I was thinking about them as standalone expansions. The other reason I was thinking about them as standalone expansions are they add new playing pieces as well as whole new cards. So now I don't even know. I'm going to have to probably look this up and make a note in the video when I edit it as to whether these are in fact standalone expansions or not, because they do add playing pieces and new cards to go with the new maps. I'm sure there must be some things from the base game that you need. In any case, I do tend to mix them with the base game cards to create a fun play experience. And each of the new boards does add some new features that make the game kind of unique and interesting. So number 8 might be a complete fail, but in any case, it is my Clank stuff. Number 7 is definitely a standalone expansion, finally. And this is Spectreop's Broken Covenant. With this one, we have brand new characters, we have a whole new board to play on, and it takes what is for me the best one versus many hidden movement game and adds just a whole bunch more fun stuff to make it even better. This is one that very much does stand alone as a excellent game in its own right, but combined with the base game too, all the stuff that the base game adds to the experience, I think it's all great. And that's why it's at number 7. Number 6 is a standalone expansion for my very favorite game of all time. And here we have Gloomhaven, Jaws of the Lion, still in shrink wrap no less. But in this box we have 4 new characters, 7 new monster types, 3 new bosses, and a whole new 25 scenario campaign. I got this with the hopes that in the not too distant future I'll be able to play it with my kids as kind of a starting point to Gloomhaven, because it does ease players into the game much more gently than with the gigantic base game and just diving into the whole works all at once. So maybe in a year or 2 my kids will be old enough to start diving into Jaws of the Lion with me, and meanwhile it will sit patiently on my shelf. So that was number 6. I'm going to clear these up and get out my top 5. And just before we round up the top 5 here, I want to send a big thank you to my supporters, to my Patreon supporters, Joanna and Tommy. Thank you very much for your help. And a special thank you as well to NQD for your support at this time. It really means the world to me. So thanks for helping me out. It is greatly appreciated. And now let us get to my number 5 standalone expansion. And that is The Quest for El Dorado, The Golden Temples. This, I believe, is the second expansion to the Quest for El Dorado. The first one was Heroes and Hexes, which is one expansion that I was just kind of so-so with. I definitely appreciated having more cards to mix in with the whole deck building element, but I wasn't super fond of the curses element of that particular expansion. So when this one came along and added a little pick up and deliver element and the whole gold thing, as well as all the new cards it adds, I was really pleased with what it added to the game. I haven't played this one on its own. I've only mixed it in with the base game, which I think is how it really shines, but it has been a very enjoyable experience, which is why it's at my number 5. Now my number 4, I do not have a copy. I recently sold my copy, although I'm not sure how smart a decision that was. But the game itself is Pandemic: Fall of Rome. I haven't played any of the other implementations of Pandemic, such as Iberia and Rising Tide and so forth, but I was instantly hooked by the Roman history that the game is based around. Basically now, instead of fighting diseases, you are trying to keep control of the various tribes that are around the Roman expansion. And it's just so clever how they wove that historical element into the framework of the original Pandemic game. Pandemic is one of those games that I've played a lot over the years. We played the original Pandemic so much after it was released that eventually we got tired of it and sold it. And then we played through Pandemic Legacy Seasons 1 and 2. So with each new experience of Pandemic, I've played it a ton and sort of gotten a little burned out on the game. But Pandemic: Fall of Rome was such a really neat implementation that I'm kind of regretting having sold it. But I did, so let's move along to my number 3, which I've just realized is a re-implementation of my number 3 ranked game of all time. Actually, this standalone expansion is what makes it my number 3 ranked game of all time, and that is Mr. Jack in New York. I got to talk about Mr. Jack with my previous expansions video and to talk about the Mr. Jack extension, and this one takes the game and just redoes it in a new setting with new characters and a whole new approach to the map, in that the map itself is built up by the players as the game progresses. It starts as this very open-ended board with not a lot of restrictions as to how you choose to build it out as the game progresses. And that's what makes each gameplay so different from the next, because essentially you're kind of setting up the game as you play the game. It works so well, and it takes the original game of Mr. Jack, which I already was super fond of, and just makes it that much better even. So for an experienced Mr. Jack player, I would definitely recommend Mr. Jack in New York. For somebody who's new to the system, the original Mr. Jack is definitely more approachable and easier to get into because it has the static setup, and so you know what you're working with as you're going into the game. You don't have to have quite as much of a broad knowledge of the game going into it. But this one's definitely my choice for the experience I've had now with the game. Coming into number 2 and then number 1, you're going to see some very close similarities between the two. Number 2 goes back to a system that I just talked about, and it is Pandemic Legacy Season 1. We weren't as enthralled with Season 2, but Season 1 provided us with some of the best gaming experiences we've ever had. Just the whole legacy concept just blows my mind. It's just such an ingenious design system, and so much work to pull off, obviously. Even though we're finished with the game now, we did get our 18 or so plays of it, I think, and just definitely loved every minute of that gameplay. The twists and turns and surprises and all that fun stuff that you can only find in a legacy game. And that's why it's my number 2. My number 1 is another legacy game. It's one where we only got the first gameplay done before my whole personal life totally fell apart on me. So we just got to dip our toes in it and see just what a wonderful game system it was. And that is Clank Legacy Acquisitions Incorporated. You know I love Clank, and this just adds a ton of cool stuff to the base game, and I only saw just a little bit of it, but the whole story, the narrative you're actually experiencing and working through, all this stuff that is added to the map and everything else that I will not talk about for fear of spoilers. It's just such a special experience. Now I'm not exactly sure what I'm going to do with this legacy game now that my situation has changed so much. It certainly carries with it now some very bittersweet memories, so I don't know if it's going to be too hard to get back into playing this someday, but I'm definitely hanging on to it because I think I could have a lot of fun with somebody with this game at some point. And that's why this is my number 1 standalone expansion. How about you? What standalone expansions have knocked your socks off? I would love to hear your perspective on this unique category of games. The preceding video has been brought to you free of charge by me, Josh. The only thing I ask in return is that you could do one of the following. Give me a thumb up, push the subscribe button, or share the link to this video with somebody who you think would enjoy it. Cheers. I've ranked these 10 games simply based on how much I enjoy playing them. Is that true? How have I ranked these? Good question. With that, I haven't played any of the other implementations of Pip, and talk about the extent Mr. Jack, because essentially you're kind of like